So today, I want to talk about something that happened at the United Nations on April 7th, and I genuinely believe most people completely misunderstood it. Not just a little, completely. I'm talking about the moment China and Russia vetoed the UN Security Council resolution on the Strait of Hormuz. The Western media's take was immediate and predictable. China and Russia just sided with Iran. They're the bad guys. They're shielding a reckless regime that's holding the global economy hostage. But that is the wrong way to look at this. That is the wrong frame entirely. Because here's my question, and I want you to sit with this for a moment before I answer it. If China vetoed this resolution, and China is the world's largest buyer of Iranian oil, and China gets a massive portion of its energy through the Strait of Hormuz, then why would China veto a resolution that would reopen the strait? Why would the biggest victim of a blockade be the one blocking the solution? Think about that. Because once you understand the answer, you don't just understand the veto, you understand the entire war, you understand who is really winning, and you understand why China's veto wasn't a mistake. It was the single smartest strategic move of this entire conflict. Let me break this down carefully. Part 1. What actually happened on April 7th. Let's start from the beginning. On April 7th, 2026, the United Nations Security Council voted on a resolution originally proposed by Bahrain. The resolution would have authorized countries to use, and I'm quoting directly, all necessary means to ensure freedom of transit through the Strait of Hormuz. 11 countries voted yes. China and Russia vetoed. Pakistan and Colombia abstained. But the details matter here, because what happened inside that room tells you everything about the strategy behind the veto. The original resolution was extremely aggressive. It would have given any country legal cover to use military force to reopen the strait. Russia, China, and even France all said, no, this is too extreme. We cannot authorize the use of force. So they revised it. They took out all references to offensive military action. Still, China and Russia vetoed. Then they revised it again. They took out any reference to Security Council authorization entirely. They made it softer, weaker, more diplomatic. Still, China and Russia said no every single time. After the vote, the American ambassador said, China and Russia have sided with a regime that seeks to intimidate the Gulf into submission. The UK ambassador said, China and Russia chose to shield their ally, Iran. That's the Western narrative. But is that what really happened? Or is something much more sophisticated going on? Part 2. How to actually read geopolitics. Here's a framework I've talked about before, and it applies perfectly here. Never look at what a country says. Always look at what a country does. And more importantly, always ask, what does this action actually benefit? Apply that to China. China imports roughly 10 to 11 million barrels of oil per day. A huge chunk of that comes from the Gulf and passes through the Strait of Hormuz. In theory, China should want the strait open. In theory, China is being hurt by the closure. And yes, in the short term, China is being hurt. But here's the thing, China does not make decisions based on the short term. China makes decisions based on the long term. And in the long term, this veto is one of the most strategically brilliant things China has done in a generation. Let me explain why, step by step. Step 1. What the resolution would have actually done. Even in its watered-down final form, the resolution would have given the United States and its allies legal legitimacy to use military force in and around the Strait of Hormuz. It would have been the United Nations saying, yes, America, you have the right to be here. You have the right to control this waterway. Now think about what that means for China. If America successfully reopens the strait by force, if Iran is defeated or forced to back down, then America has demonstrated something enormously important. It has demonstrated that it can still control the world's most critical energy choke point. It has shown that the American empire, even in decline, still has the muscle to decide who gets energy and who doesn't. That means China goes back to being dependent on American goodwill for its energy supply. China goes back to a world where America can threaten to cut off Chinese oil by controlling the strait. There's a term for this in Chinese strategic thinking. It's called the Malacca Dilemma. It's China's deep fear that America could strangle its economy by controlling the sea lanes around Southeast Asia. The Strait of Hormuz is the same problem, just on the other side of the map. It's a choke point that America, if it controls it, can use against China. So step one is simple. If America wins this resolution and uses it to reopen the strait by force, America wins strategically and China loses. That means China has every reason to block the resolution. Step two, what happens if the strait stays closed now? This is where it gets really interesting. Yes, the closure of the strait is hurting China, but it is also accelerating something that China has been working toward for decades: the de-dollarization of global trade, the weakening of the petrodollar system, and the rise of alternative trade routes that China controls. Let me explain the petrodollar system first, because it's the key to everything. Since 1973, nearly all oil in the world has been traded in US dollars. That was a deal between America and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis sell oil only in dollars, and America protects the Saudi regime. Because everyone in the world needs oil, everyone needs dollars. That creates permanent global demand for the US currency. It's what allows America to print money, run enormous deficits, and finance its military empire. Without the petrodollar, America cannot afford to be America. Now, what happens when the Strait of Hormuz is closed? Gulf states can't export oil. Petrodollars stop flowing. The Gulf states stop recycling those dollars back into American stock markets, American bonds, and American AI data centers. The entire financial architecture of American power starts to crack. And China is watching this happen, thinking, this is actually good for us. Because every week that the petrodollar system is under stress, the world is being pushed to find alternatives. And the alternatives that exist, the yuan-based oil trade, the Belt and Road payment systems, the Russia-Iran-China energy corridors, all benefit China. So the closure of the strait, in the medium term, is accelerating the very thing China wants most: the end of dollar dominance in global trade. Step 3. China's alternative energy strategy. You might say, but wait, China is running out of oil because of the blockade. How is this actually good for them? Here's where you have to understand something important about how China thinks about supply chains. China has been preparing for exactly this kind of energy disruption for years. Let me give you specific examples. China has been building strategic petroleum reserves, massive stockpiles of oil for exactly this kind of emergency. It has been diversifying energy suppliers, so it's not overly dependent on any single source. It has been building the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which gives access to ports in the Arabian Sea that completely bypass the Strait of Hormuz. It has been developing the North-South Transport Corridor with Russia and Iran, which creates an overland energy route from the Persian Gulf to Central Asia and beyond. And most importantly, China has been rapidly building domestic renewable energy capacity, solar, wind, nuclear, specifically to reduce dependence on Gulf oil. So yes, the blockade causes short-term pain for China, but China is actually better positioned to absorb that pain than almost any other major economy because China has been preparing for this scenario. The Americans haven't. The Europeans haven't. The Japanese and South Koreans, who are also deeply dependent on Gulf oil, haven't. China took the short-term pain, but it's the country best equipped to handle it. And every week the crisis continues. The alternatives that China has built become more important, and the American-controlled maritime system becomes less relevant. Step 4. The legal and moral dimension. Most analysts completely ignore this part. China's ambassador Fu Kong said at the Security Council, I'm paraphrasing, that the resolution failed to address the root causes of the conflict. Russia's ambassador said the resolution blamed Iran while completely ignoring what America and Israel did to start this war in the first place. And here's the thing, they are not wrong. Think about what actually happened. America and Israel launched military strikes on Iran, a sovereign nation. They bombed Iranian nuclear facilities. They killed Iranian leaders. And then, after starting this war, America went to the UN and said, Iran is threatening the strait. Please give us permission to use force against them. Just sit with that logic. You start a war. Then you go to the international community and say, please authorize us to use force against the country we attacked because they're fighting back. This is exactly the kind of move that the rest of the world, the global South, Asia, Africa, Latin America, has been watching for decades. And the world is tired of it. When China vetoed this resolution, it wasn't just protecting Iran. It was saying something to every country that has ever been on the receiving end of American power. We will not give America a legal stamp of approval approval for this. The global reaction was very different from what you saw in Western media. Much of the world saw the veto not as China shielding Iran, but as China enforcing basic principles of international law. You do not get to attack a country and then get UN authorization to punish that country for defending itself. That is a narrative win for China of enormous proportions. It positions China as the defender of the international rules-based order, the very thing America claims to defend. And it positions America as the country that breaks the rules and then asks for legal cover afterward. Step 5. What this tells us about the New World Order. Let me zoom out and put this veto in the context of something much bigger. I've argued for a long time that the world is moving from a unipolar system, where America is the dominant power and sets the rules, to a multipolar system, where multiple great powers have meaningful influence and no single country can impose its will on the others. The veto on April 7th was a very clear signal of where we are in that transition, because what China and Russia essentially said was this: the United Nations Security Council is not America's rubber stamp. We have a veto. We will use it. There are things America wants to do, things America believes it has the right to do, that we will simply block. For 30 years, since the end of the Cold War, America has operated with a degree of freedom that no other power in history has had. If America decided to invade a country, it could. If America decided to sanction a country, it could. If America decided to use the UN to authorize its actions, it usually could, because Russia was weak and China wasn't yet powerful enough to consistently push back. That era is over, and the Hormuz veto is one of the clearest signals that it's over, because now you have a situation where America goes to the UN to get authorization for something it considers a basic, obvious humanitarian necessity, keeping a major waterway open, and it cannot get it, not because of procedural tricks, but because two of the world's most powerful countries looked at what America was doing and said, no, we are not going to help you with this. This is a massive structural shift in how the world works. And most people aren't paying attention because they're focused on the military dimension, but the political and institutional dimension is just as important. The United Nations Security Council is the last remaining institution of global governance, and China just showed the world that it will use its power in that institution to block American unilateralism. Part 3. Tying it all together. Let me tie all of this together and give you the complete picture of why this veto was the smartest move of the entire war. Do a thought experiment. Imagine you're a strategic analyst with enormous resources, watching this war, asking yourself, who is actually winning? Most people look at the military dimension. How many bombs were dropped? How many missiles were fired? Which side destroyed more assets? But that's the wrong way to look at it. War is fought across 4 dimensions: military, economic, political, and narrative. If you look at all 4, China's veto advanced its position in every single one, simultaneously. Militarily, China didn't fire a single bullet or spend a single dollar on weapons. But it blocked America from getting international legal cover for its military operations. That weakens America's military position politically, without China taking any military risk. Economically, the veto kept pressure on the petrodollar system. It kept oil prices high enough to hurt the American financial system, and it accelerated de-dollarization, all while China's alternative energy infrastructure helps it absorb the pain better than its rivals. Politically, the veto positioned China as a defender of international law and national sovereignty in a world where most countries are not part of the Western alliance. The Global South, which has suffered from decades of American military intervention, largely sees China as being on the right side. And in the narrative dimension, China is now telling a story about itself that is very appealing to most of the world. We are not the aggressor. We are not the ones bombing sovereign nations. We are the ones defending the principle that you cannot attack a country and then ask the UN to authorize punishing that country for fighting back. In all 4 dimensions, the veto was a win for China, and it cost China almost nothing. That is what smart strategy looks like. Part 4. Addressing the counter-argument. Let me address one more thing, because I can already hear the counter-argument. But China is hurting from the oil shortage. China can't afford this strategy indefinitely. Eventually, China will have to negotiate a reopening of the strait. To that, I say, yes, you're right. China cannot sustain an indefinite oil shortage. Nobody can. But here's what matters. Who runs out of time first? America is running out of interceptor missiles. America is running out of political will at home. Only about about 40% of Americans support this war. America is running out of financial patience. Every week of high oil prices puts more pressure on the American stock market, the American economy, the American political system. And America is running out of allies who are willing to take the economic pain with them. Iran is running out of almost nothing. Iran's economy is actually benefiting from the lifting of sanctions that this war has inadvertently caused. Iran is generating more revenue from oil sales than it has in years. Iran has been preparing for this war for 25 years. It is not running out of will or capacity. And China has its reserves, its alternative routes, its domestic energy production. China can hold out longer than America can sustain the political and economic cost of this war. So when you ask, who benefits from the passage of time? The answer is not America. The answer is China and Iran. And China's veto was designed precisely to extend time, to keep the pressure on, to let the economic and political costs accumulate on the American side. This is not Iran's war. This is not China's war. This is a war being fought, in significant part, over the question of who controls the global economic order. And China is fighting it in the smartest way possible, without firing a single weapon, without losing a single soldier, just by saying 2 letters at the United Nations. No, that is the power of a veto. That is the power of a great power that understands strategy. And that is why April 7th, 2026 may be looked back on as one of the most important days in the history of American decline.